Hey everybody, I'm Sean Robinson from Living the Line, and with me today is Carson Grubaugh. That's the hand of Carson Grubaugh, featured in The Strange Death of Alex Raymond, which is hopefully coming to a comic store or bookstore or mailbox near you very soon.
Hopefully, yes.
Today, Carson is going to introduce us to a few books that he has with him right now from the esteemed Seattle publisher Fantagraphics Books. And this series is called the Complete
Complete.
Crepax. Um, Guido Crepax is a fantastic Italian cartoonist who has not in a very long time had actually never in English had the definitive versions of his work in print. And Fantagraphics have been putting out this collection for, when's the first volume come out, Carson?
I don't know when the first one's out of print. I haven't been able to get it. I think they're doing like one or two a year.
Okay.
So a couple of years back. Um, but the first one's super hard to get a hold of. There's going to be, as far as I know, there's going to be 10 of them total. And then I think there might be a reprint
Now, how big are these
of the
things? Are
first
these
one.
like doorstop level, or are these like kill your foes with a
Yeah,
single
this
blow to the
is
head?
like totally kill. It's almost my whole four. It's basically my, tip of my finger to the crook of my elbow. So these are big, heavy books. Let me get a ruler real quick. I'll tell you, they're like about 400 something pages a piece, and there's going to be 10 of them, so you can get an idea of how productive he is. They're 10 by 13,
Okay.
and 400 plus page books. They all have an essay in the front and the back, and I was just telling you that I tend not to read essays in books because I'm
Right.
just interested in what the art has to say, but a lot of historical information
Oh,
about both the artist
Louise
and
Brooks.
yeah, she's the influence for the main character in most of his stories, Valentina, or the character he's most famous for.
Right. The
Um,
volume four is basically the early Valentina stories, right? I mean, it starts in like
yeah,
8 or something.
they're so yeah, we'll open that up and take a look at it in a second. Um, Typical of Fantagraphics, they're just gorgeous production quality. One of the things that I really like, let me get this. Let me get this one open so it doesn't topple over here. One of the things that I really like is they each have on the cover, and I don't know how well this shows up in the video, but they each have like a different stamped pattern in them. Like this one has a lot of little flowers.
Hmm.
So there's this very textural quality to the covers that's nice. And then the spines are all designed. The colors are kind of weird when they all sit next to each other on the shelf, but it's a really good it's just a really good like eye candy on your shelf type of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, volume 4, which is the one I chose that we'll look at mostly because it has the most interesting formal stuff out of the books that I have, and just the stuff that I think is most compelling about Crepax, which is his composition, his design and composition of his pages. We tend to focus on like line work and stuff like that. I mean, also a beautiful illustrator, but he's such a fascinating composer that this is why I chose this book. But yeah, this one starts with his really early work. And this is a gripe I have. By the way, this stuff is highly erotic and some of it's like, straight up perverse. So if that's not your thing, beware of that. Some of it gets pretty far into the sadomasochism. This starts out with the story from 1965, so pretty early on. He originally started out doing stories about this character Philip Rembrandt, who was like his superhero character, really. Um, and here's a page that I like the composition, just because I like this little infographic he has at the bottom, and Rembrandt has this extraordinary psychic power, and he can make people freeze. And so the early stories are pretty much that. And Valentina comes in as I think this is the first time she appears in one of the Rembrandt stories. He gets introduced to her as the love interest. And as time progresses through the series of stories, you can tell that Crepax, he was in love with his actress Louise Brooks. I've picked that up. Totally
Right.
fascinated with the way she looked, and so he just Valentina becomes the main character for all of the volumes I've got so far. There's other stuff like interpretations of Dracula and interpretations of Frankenstein interspersed in some of these. There's this one has a story about jazz in it, I think, or maybe that's volume 5. The biggest problem I have with these reprints, though, is Fantagraphics, and I don't know why. Maybe if I did my diligence and read the essays, they'd explain it. But they're not printing his work in chronological order. They're printing it based around themes and things like that. So when you pick up, this is like probably one of the first stories or the first story that has Valentina in it. This is volume 4, and I've already been reading stuff. So it's a very choppy read. And then he's not the best writer anyways, in my opinion. The action hero stories are, I don't know, I get bored with them pretty quick, and then it evolves, and we'll take a look at it with some of the later work later in this volume, but it evolves into very stream of consciousness, just erotic stuff, and a lot of it's even silent. But when it has text, I find it, I don't know, unnecessary to my experience of looking at the book. And I think part of that for me, though, is there is a mythology about these characters, and they have kids and they grow old, and but that's disrupted by the bizarre, like, out of sequence print job. So maybe that's deterring me from being able to read it. But I'll be honest, I read like half of a volume, and I've been buying them and just don't read them. I just flip through them and enjoy the art. But
there's so much to take from in terms of, like, textural stuff that you'll see later and things like that. But yeah, I was noticing a pretty heavy French New Wave film influence. A lot of the sort of, you talk about stream of consciousness and the sort of like dialogue butting up against each other, and cross-cutting and other sort of new wave filmic techniques reminded me a lot of the early, like, Jean-Luc Godard film. Weekend was the one I was having like flashbacks to as I was doing a flip through. I haven't read the whole volume here that we're talking about, but I've read some of it and done a flip through the whole thing. And Weekend is a Godard film that's basically like an hour and a half of a traffic jam, with plenty of like throwaway violence and throwaway sex and sort of shocking elements interspersed with this sort of new freedom as it was seen at the time. And there seems to be a lot of that in these early stories.
Yeah, and I mean, it's very of its time. Like, this is 65. You see like the op art and the mod look in a lot of it. I've always loved that stuff, so that's probably one of the things I'm responding to in his art. And you'll see in later pages that I have tagged that carries over into his design aesthetic as well. And that's definitely, when I first saw his work, my eyes just bugged out. Like, it's this beautiful just composition that speaks to a lot to rhythm. That's something I wanted to talk about a lot. And when we do, instead of doing a recreation of his brush work, which is pen work, which is phenomenal, and he's very experimental with it throughout the years, I thought it would be cool to try and somehow capture a sense of his composition and the sense of rhythm. And I think a lot of that comes from his obvious interest in this like pop art stuff. They even mention, I think it's on this page, here, seriously, Alice, that Bridget Riley dress is gorgeous. And if you're talking about Bridget Riley, you're talking about one of the most influential, optical artists of all time. Maybe I should have pulled up a Bridget Riley. I can do that when we flip over to the screen. So he's very aware of like modern fine art as well, and that comes into it. So I tagged this page because it shows the Rembrandt and then shows the introduction of Valentina. But another thing I noticed when I look at his work is how far his influence goes. So this one I tagged because, like, who's that right there?
That's wild. Marv.
But also, like, what other artist?
I
know.
Oh, is it you're saying like a
Can you see who I'm seeing in that? Another artist that this looks a lot. I'm seeing like Eddie Campbell, Bacchus. Hardcore in some of the faces here. Maybe it's less obvious to other people, but some of this early work has that really rough look to it.
No, I saw some serious Eddie Campbell in some of the early Valentina stories. There was one particular one with her on her back and something about like the ocean spray and like a sort of like suggestion of the ocean spray being a vaginal like smell and like pen line crossover between the figure and the ocean. That was a crazy, like I was just like, oh, Eddie's seen this.
Yeah, I see a lot of Eddie Campbell. Like, well, I see a lot of Crepax in Eddie Campbell, and I'll show later. I think Frank Miller like cribbed from this guy, and I've never heard anyone talk about that influence. You like when you see Ronin by Frank Miller, you see, oh, he's stealing from Moebius here. He's stealing
Right.
from Lone Wolf and Cub, and those are the ones you normally hear about. And this is kind of an unsung influence on Frank Miller, I think.
Yeah.
So this page here gets to that super rhythmic sense of panel composition, very musical. I love that they're, you know, this is the first time they get intimate with each other, and I love how the page like spirals in
Mhm.
like that instead of moves linear. There's like a sucking into the passion, but then there's also a side to side narrative read here, where here they're obviously hugging and here's like you know, afterwards. So even though the spiral kind of moves like that, there's this disjoint of time that I
Mhm.
think, you know, represents like a really good erotic encounter. You kind of lose sense of time and self. So there's things like that that I really appreciate. He's a huge fan of Alex Raymond. There's actually a page in here where he cribs from Raymond, and I think you can see some of that like stuff that the fashion model stuff that Dave was doing in Glamour Puss. I don't
Right.
know if Dave has ever seen Crepax at all, but um, a similar love for fashion as what Dave had. This page here, I just absolutely love the
Uh,
having the circle inside the square.
yeah, that was fantastic. I had flashbacks to the Jack pages in Strange Death with her with the apartment block behind her. Really reminded me of the file folder uh,
Yeah, and
section.
he'll do that like big empty white area with lots of dense
Right.
brushwork and stuff that we were purposely using in You Don't Know Jack. So I I had seen this stuff by the time I was doing that. I don't know that I was so conscious of it. I think that's maybe more his interest in Raymond and our interest in Alex
Right.
Raymond and those guys kind of colliding. But I just something about that again is so musical to me as
Right.
well.
This the plot of this story is reminiscent of the Antonioni film Blow Up, where somebody basically accidentally shoots a photo of what they think later is a murder, and
Yeah,
they become obsessed with the idea of like basically identifying the murder. And that's from like 67 or something. So this is predating that. I wouldn't be surprised if this is an influence on that.
yeah, this is 66, this page at least. So this, yeah, this is the early stuff, and they're more readable, like adventure narratives. So yeah, they're trying to get and destroy this photograph, and you know, Rembrandt's out to get the bad guys, and Valentina's kind of just his girlfriend. Um, Here we go. Here we get super mod, like
Wow.
these pages like this. This is another one of those, to me, it's like what I love so much about him, besides his line work and stuff, is the rhythm of it. So I love that you can take a unit like this, and you're a musician, Sanj, so
Mm-hmm.
you should understand this concept. But you take this, and that's like, that's a bar, and that's 4 beats in a bar, right?
Right.
But then you can take this unit, and you've got the two against that. So you've
Right.
kind of got like, to me, they're polymetric,
Yeah.
polymetric in nature or polyrhythmic in nature. And I don't know, I played drums in high school and I still love music. So I'm very curious about ratio and relationship in design. And I think he uses that very well.
You can
He's
almost
also, sorry, go ahead.
you can almost hear the you know, like faux jungle doom, 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 doom. If this was a
Yeah.
sequence in a movie from the, you know, 66 or 67, and these would all be flashing in neon, um why you've got this very exciting cross-cut sequence. This is super filmic and rhythmic. Oh,
Yeah, and then you have like the duh, 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 duh,
right.
duh, 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 duh. Like I just love that. I love that in comics. Chris Ware is another guy who's really good about that. I think Chris Ware uses it more for a sense of time. These are more musical pages to me. I don't think that this necessarily, like if this represents 8, these are 1 second a piece. This represents 8 seconds. Like I don't think Crepaugh's doing that. Chris Ware, I think, does stuff like that. I also love the way he'll zoom in to abstract stuff. So that's a consistent trick that he uses throughout. Big solid blacks. That's something I'm interested in. What happens if you take out everything? Maybe that's something we can play with later, but what happens if you take out all but the big black areas? I know you tend to do that when you ink. So I wonder about that with his art, what these would look like stripped of the line work. Here is
Yeah, I love this story.
Yeah,
oh, the one right before it. Sorry.
Trick. So you read this one. I gave up on reading these things. So tell us what this story is.
The one before it is the first like childhood Valentina story. She has dolls right before this. She has dolls that she's playing with, that she's imagining their inner lives, and it's a soldier and a ballerina, and she gives them, they sort of are taking over her imagination, and both have their own agency, and just a like sort of dream logic, but sort of through a child's lens. Like the guy at the end there is shoveling coal, and the soldier is emerging from the coal. It's not,
and the fish turns into the train.
Right, exactly. And the suggestion being that the girl is having these immersive experiences with her toys, but that they're saying something to each other, or that the like archetypes are speaking to her and speaking to her about what adulthood is really going to be like. They're broken.
Well, and that's where, when I have found some that I can stick with reading, they're usually more psychological like that. And in I think volume 2 or 3, there's some stuff where Valentina's at a therapist, and he has ways of showing like these rounded corners are the fantasy things, and the straight corners are like real life. And there's one later where he uses dotted panel borders to suggest memories, or so he uses panel borders to suggest her different psychological states. And I think that's where he goes with it. And then she grows up, her fantasies tend to get surreal and perversely erotic.
Right.
But because the stories are all out of order, it's hard for me to follow that development of her as a character. And they read as like just these little weird psychological nuggets that are harder to dive into. So when I get all of them, I'll like try and sort out the order.
I don't really understand the rationale to present them out of sequence.
They're thematic. So like one of them is like stories at home, and another one's American stories, and another one's more like the darkly erotic stuff. So they're thematic. But I don't know. I'm sure if I bothered to read one of the long essays, the reason I don't read the essays isn't just because I'm lazy. It's because I very much don't like pre-informing my read of a work. I want to read the work, and then if I like it, I want to go see what other people have to say about it. Like we've talked about that. Like when we reviewed Monsters, I think we both wanted to see how other people reviewed it. Right. And we looked around. So then I'll go read the essays. But in these, because I didn't get far enough with the reading, it didn't interest me enough to find out more about him or his life or whatever, other than the cursory glance that he's way into Louise Brooks. So it's not just that I'm lazy. It's just I don't like someone else telling me what to think of a work. I think the work should explain itself to me. Anyways, I just love this page, the childish drawing, and I love the childish drawing in the word balloons, because this is like that point in childhood development where they're moving from a visual creature to a linguistic creature, and it starts to ruin their ability to draw because they're no longer drawing what they see. They're trying to draw the icon. These are pretty sophisticated childhood drawings because you have a really good artist trying to mimic childhood, I think. So they're a little too good. But I like that they're speaking pictorially, and that's mixed up. I think that's a good representation of how kids are moving from one to the other, and maybe how we ruin kids in education by overemphasizing language over the visuals. So
Right.
I like that page. That's
Is
another fun formal trick.
is this the first use of a pictograph in a balloon that you've seen chronologically?
Oh yeah, I think it's the only time I've seen it in the books.
But what I'm wondering about, just because that particular device, I had asked Dave about it before because he's the earliest I had seen it. He used it in a bunch of short stories in like 1983, 84, something like that.
This is 69.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So
And he said he had gotten it from Sergio Aragon, or Aragones, so I was just curious what the time was on this particular thing.
1969 on this one. But that's
Great
another
device.
thing I love about these books, and this volume in particular. Here's another one. He's so formally playful,
Yeah.
which I'm not used to seeing in the European artists, to be honest. The European books tend to be very straightforward narratives, usually with some little formal trickery here and there. But this does not seem like something that you normally get out of a European comic to me. So I'm always into games and comics. I like the idea. I had tried this once to make a board game that told us multiple stories as you move around. So I love that the characters split off. Brandon Graham, who we talked to, he's done this a couple times in King City, I think was the one. Yeah, King City. He has a big playable board game. So love that. Again, it automatically instills that sense of rhythm into it. It would have been extra interesting, I think, if these were all filled up. But and this is another thing that I associate with him, just her hair as the beat inside of those little rhythmic things. He plays that trick over and over again. So there's just, this volume has a whole bunch of that. Here you see she has one story where she's thinking about her, but it's Crepax's favorite cartoonists, and he does a lot of style mimicry throughout the stories in this book. So here it's very much he's going into Flash Gordon.
Yeah, I was going to say there's some Raymond right there.
Yeah, that was one thing. I did skim one or two of the essays. I didn't fully read them, but he was definitely a huge fan of Alex Raymond and a lot of the newspaper strip guys. So there you have some Alex Raymond, which I thought was really cool. Here, he's got the page turn sideways trick. This is 72, so an early sideways page trick. And obviously Valentina's hanging out with the Phantom. And I didn't mark all the pages that he does this. Yeah, see, she's reading comics there. Here's a cool one, infographics in a comic. Now here's another what I think of when I think of Crepax and what I love about him the most. Just these dense, like multi-panel zoom in abstractions of lots of things. They take on, I think Scott McCloud would call that aspect to aspect, almost like it's frozen moments or real quick little moments of things. There's also some stuff like this where he lines up the panel border here. So again, I'm talking about rhythm. Like if this is a unit here, it's kind of split into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think. So he split this into 5, but he gets the gutter here runs right down into this piping here. So it creates these intricate, like meta compositional movements between everything. Like each panel is well composed, but then the whole page just becomes this roiling rhythmic mess of cool stuff. Yeah, I don't know. And taking this here, and that's 3. This is like, yeah, that's 3 against 4. So you get the polyrhythm there. And here you're seeing, this is some of his later work. This is 72. He starts off with that really more blunt style that I'm going to show the Frank Miller images, and he develops into this much more thin line, less black, kind of like this page, this very delicate line work as it goes into the 70s. Check this one out.
Oh yeah, it's really something.
And it's, if you take
Wild.
if you folded it, it would be like, this is what you like, this is the top view, and this is what you see if you look that way. This is, so it's like got this kind of dimensional trickery to it.
This is
really nice.
This is a what is that called? There's a certain type of not explosion, but there's an architectural
just an elevation.
An elevation. This is a simple flat elevation of them in bed. That's just wild. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's such a, he's so clever. Like every trick in the book, he's figured out how to put it in the comics.
And I really admire that he identified what it is that he wanted to draw. You know,
which
like,
is sexy ladies.
Right, exactly. You know, he's making the sort of half-hearted, you know, super guy comic, and you know, she shows up, and he's like, "Well, so I could be drawing this guy for the next 30 years, or."
Yeah, and then he just lets it go and like follows it down into get, like I said, more and more erotic, and then the eroticism gets more explicit and more perverse as it gets later too. Like it really goes into the Aubrey Beardsley type of influence and some of the erotic comics there. Here's the little ... pattern.
Yeah.
And I forget what that was. I think this is Memories, or this is Rembrandt's internal life, and the rounded ones are her internal life or something. There was a logic I figured out when I was reading it. So he develops his own language too, that as you spend time reading it, he educates you in the language of what these things mean. Like, and again, I think it re-emphasizes the rhythm, the musicality of his pieces. Here he's got Dick Tracy. He goes into that style. So she's reading more comics.
She's drawn in that Dick Tracy style on that one panel right there too. It's rather alarming.
Yeah, so another thing, you know, that I think I feel a kinship to this because of what we did on Strange Death of Alex Raymond, where we're mimicking styles. And I've always been a fan of style as symbol. I think I've talked about that before, that you can take everything everyone knows about Dick Tracy and like download that all into, it's like just putting a smiley face or the Nike symbol. Nike symbol downloads this whole idea of what Nike is. That silly commercial that just came out, you know, like all of that downloads with that. As soon as you use someone else's style, you download everything that comes with them. So I really feel that. Here's another really great page where now he's interspersing that dot pattern. They're walking along the shore here, and it literally makes like a music sheet almost that they're walking along. This bar structure, the lights, like just, I don't know, all of that. But I really like the integration of the dots on that one. And then he starts to get into these more like montage collage looking things as he gets into the 70s, where she's in these dream worlds. They're just compositionally chaotic, but they work every time. And I was thinking that because I was thinking so much of his early work where he anchors things with the big areas of black.
Right.
But that goes away in his later work. So I was thinking, oh, he's always anchoring stuff with spotted blacks, but I'm really fascinated by how unanchored some of these later compositions become and how they're still sophisticated. Yeah, he's just a puzzle to me a little bit. His instincts must be so good. Which is crazy, because then we're gonna try and go like formulaically break it down in a few minutes. But like, how do you pull this off? More crazy panel structures. There's like panels within panels, panels around her eye, panels around her mouth, playing with these triangular things. Here's like the mouths all together, but they build up something that could be seen as 3 triangles, or it becomes dimensional with like a pyramidal form there. So it's similar to that. Yeah, and then like you're looking at her legs, but there's a panel of her face overlapping, or his hand overlapping, her hand overlapping. So a lot of play with time and space. That's really, really beautiful. Here's like he's just all over the place. He's tried everything.
Mm-hmm.
Here's like, it looks like he made a collage and then drew it, or he's cutting and pasting. There's definitely some collage element in here. But this almost looks like a Rick Veitch to me.
Uh-huh.
Like some of that kind of stuff that I've seen. And I mean, obviously there's going to be 10 volumes of these at 400 pages a piece, and he's this inventive. Like, you know, there's a bajillion examples. This one's really fun. She's talking to him. She's like, where am I? There's nothing drawn here except this little trademark that he never forgets, and is like its signature with the date. But it's not enough, my dear. We need a story. And she kicks it and breaks it. Like, so she'll do that. She'll talk to him. You know, she's got the ink here. She'll spill over the ink. So there's like these meta moments in it as well, which again, a lot of this feels very atypical for a European book to me. I mean, Moebius does some of that stuff. This almost looks, this is just a badly reproduced page. He also has this language that these people that are underground and they speak a language. And so that's always translated down here, but it's not like whoever translated the US edition is translating this. I don't think. I think if you read it in Italian, it's that same stuff. So it's just a fun. There's a lot of fun. There's a lot of other ones in here where he's mimicking other cartoonists, but I don't want to spend all day flipping through it. Here you go, where he's obviously looking at Hugo Pratt and Corto Maltese. You know, straight up showing up in the work. This is 77. At this point, the work has a lot more texture in it. Again, it looks like he's using razor blades and brushes more. Right. A lot thinner, finer work.
I noticed a lot of the subtractive white, which is very attractive to me. Rarely used, I think, because it doesn't necessarily reproduce super well unless you're focused on it, but a very cool look to it.
And this, where it looks like he's maybe putting ink on a fabric and squishing it on the paper.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of, when we go up close at some of it, we'll look at some of where he has done subtractive white. So not just formally playful, but you know, playful in terms of the finish throughout his career, the evolution of his style, which is really
love the texture. Yeah, and a lot of the textures, especially the stuff like you were saying, like applied and subtractive textures, when he's getting a lot of those things going simultaneously, it's just really rarely seen. I mean, I've got an eye for pen and ink texture, and found myself on the flip through being like, well, how in the hell did he do that? Is that dry brush? Is that dry brush plus some type of sand eraser? Is that dry brush? It's just he's got an eye for it.
I think there's a lot of, I don't know, that looks like dry brush with scratching. There's definitely some dry brush techniques here. I think he's doing impressions at certain points where he's inking up like a tissue paper or something and putting it on there and using whiteout. So it'd be really great to see these kind of original. And then this is a little bit more of like the spanky erotic art. I don't want to show too much because I don't know what the rules on YouTube are, but these are some of my favorite things of his, where he just does like, I don't know how many panels are on this page.
Nutty, that's wild.
And again, the musicality of it all. And I love also just her head is that dot. There's always that dot of her hair all over these against all this fine line work.
That page right there is, for a longest time, the only thing that I knew about Guido Crepax.
This one?
No, the one on the right there.
This one.
Yeah. So I had a book called Women in the Comics, which was not necessarily what you might think it was, on account of it's about women cartoonists, but also women characters and things like that. And they had a small sample of some Crepax stuff in here, and it's a sample from a Valentina comic. This particular page you're looking at, and a sample from something called Bianca that he did later.
I think that's his other major character besides Valentina, and that's like coming up in the future reprints. Everything I've got is pretty much all Valentina focused.
Gotcha. Well, the Valentina page that is reproduced on the right there, I found that to be so striking the first time I saw it. That specifically well, I mean, the images themselves are fairly striking, but then if you look at just let's just take the first, the top panel there with the woman. Sorry, I don't have that panel in the reproduction. Valentina has her pants, or her sweater.
They took this out?
Up. Yeah, I know. Yeah, yes, they did.
They edited out the spanky part of it.
Exactly. But
I love that we didn't plan this, by the way. Sean
Right.
just has that book. I didn't see it until we logged in, and he didn't know I tagged this page. So perfect. Anyways, go ahead.
I was haunted by the ink drawing of that woman walking away with the riding crop and the images of her, basically the marks left on her butt, and the combination of the ink texture, the contour line, and the sort of like textural, just the general thing, plus the compositional, sophistication of being able to go back and forth between those panels, was just something that was like, it's rare when you read something to think, I don't know, not just that something's like aesthetically beautiful, but that someone else is like enjoyed. I don't know exactly what it is. It's like there's an intensity to the entirety of the object.
The page as a whole.
Exactly. There's an intensity to his focus on all the different elements. He hasn't just like selected this to draw. He's drawn it with like as much skill as he can possibly muster, and he's rendered each of these things in a way that like addresses them individually, but also as part of this entire, fantasy, I guess.
And he knows how to flip between the simplicity, like just the hair and the face. That's something that, I think Frank Miller definitely stole from him. Then to the super delicate fine details and how to balance those out and not have the delicacy be overwhelmed by the big areas of black, or have the big areas of black be overwhelmed by the delicacy. And I think a lot of that has to do with, and again, now that I'm looking at this page, this line runs right down into the pole of the bed. So this is all one panel, but it effectively splits into two. This lines up to this panel here, lines up to her eye. There's a weird thing here where he's telling you to go back and forth in time along this panel. Like normally you see, okay, read to here, but he's telling you like come here and go back and forth. So yeah, there's like when you say the object, yeah, each page is a piece of art in and of itself.
Right.
It's so funny that this is the page.
Yeah, I've had this book for more than a decade, and I say that like that image haunted me. It's like, when is this guy's stuff going to come out in English? Also, the really low angle there, looking up through the wireframe bed, is very reminiscent of Russ Meyer. There's a couple Russ Meyer films. I think Vixen is the one that has a shot that's straight up through the coils of a spring bed while people are making the springs move.
And that's all you see. It's just the shifting camera.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's another thing I've always been interested in, is like the incidental details in a story. I think there's more artists starting to play with that now, where it will be like all of this stuff going on, but you'll get a zoom in on the spoon or something like that. And yeah, I've always been into that. So I really resonate with that in his work. Like artistically, I resonate with pretty much everything he's doing. Narratively, I don't know. I just said it in the video another video I made. I'm not the best guy to encounter stream of conscious surreal stuff. It's just not my thing. I lose patience with it. But I do think that would be helped, because there is an ongoing like narrative of this woman's life spread out through these books. And I think if I could latch on to that by a more chronological reading, then I would get a better sense of who she is, like the psychological stuff and the intense interiority of her thought process would matter more to me. But they're presented as a bunch of disconnected short stories, and
Right.
I'm just not, I don't have enough time. I'm not patient enough to try and like stitch it all back together.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know, maybe other people will appreciate the narrative more, but it doesn't matter. This is one of those things that I think, I mean, I'll get all 10 of them and I'll have them on my shelf, and I may never read them, but I'm constantly like picking them up and flipping through them, and learning from them. Okay, so I wanted to also look at some scans like we normally do, and then I pulled, there wasn't many examples in this volume, but I pulled some examples from volume 1, which, because I couldn't get it physically, if you try and buy volume 1 physically now, because it's out of print, it's like $700 or $800. So I did no, hell no. We'll wait for a new print. If it costs, if you see your shit on the internet for that much, publishers, it's probably time to do a reprint. That means it's very highly valued. So I did, I'll admit, I pirated a copy of volume 1 because I'm crazy like that. But there's some images in volume 1 that I think are really revealing. So I wanted to take a look at the scans and those images. All right, so first up, I just wanted to look at the Frank Miller images here.
Yeah.
Like,
just a strong one.
Yeah. That is a Frank Miller face through and through. And then more interesting to me, oh, this thing's not working. Okay. Is,
oh my God.
To me, that is like hardcore, like 300, like when he designed Xerxes, right? The way he uses all the little like belts and straps and buttons and beads on those characters in 300. To me, that's just, I got a crazy brush. Jesus Christ. Sorry, I'm using a new touchscreen thing, everybody. Oh my God. We're getting crazy.
What are you doing, Carson?
Yeah. I don't know. The buttons aren't doing what they're supposed to do. Yeah, like so much Frank Miller in there. Here's another one.
Wow.
Like, tell me that's not Xerxes from 300 and all of the all the people that the Spartans are fighting. They all have that kind of patterning on them. And the face, like those big like Frank Miller lips and everything. Yeah, so those things. And like I said, I've never heard anyone talk about that aspect of Frank Miller's influences. Like just the nose there, the pouty lips, the eyes, like everything about that. So I thought that was interesting. I don't know where he was seeing this stuff, but maybe it was in that book you got. When's that book you got printed?
That's a good question. I would bet that he was probably picking them up. A lot of stuff has been available just in Italian or in French. This is from 1977. So if enterprising cartoonist flips through this book and sees a fantastic cartoonist they know nothing about, you could probably pick up a bunch of Italian Crepax books on import.
Yeah.
68. Yeah, this looks an awful lot like somebody under the influence of Beardsley. You can see how somebody would translate the thin bondage thread that runs bondage ribbon that runs between Beardsley, Crepax, and Frank Miller.
This thing right here, yeah. Well, and then here some of these ones that I got just to look at the different print sources that they obviously, like different materials they obviously had to print from at Fantagraphics. I think you see some of that Aubrey Beardsley as well. I didn't scan the most obvious ones from that influence or I didn't tag them because they're so highly pornographic, with like people blowing air up each other's ass and stuff.
Right.
That I didn't want to look at that. But here's one of the good, like really high resolution scans of his really delicate work. You're definitely getting some loss there. So you always say that's an indication of this being printed from a negative.
Well, I mean that's not necessarily. I mean, I would guess so, a negative or a print source. But yeah, you know, if something is professionally scanned these days, you know, on a strong optically sharp scanner, even without a sharpening routine, you can expect to get a lot of more detail retained. But that kind of blowout was easier to accomplish in the photographic processes. But that doesn't mean that that's 100% how it was, you know, how it was.
So, but overall, I mean, they're obviously printing from the best source they have. And this is a really small print in there. So the delicacy of line is really nice. They are losing some of the finest lines in areas like that. I got like a telestrator now. But here, you also have some of that reductive white that you were talking about, like just a very small amount where he's gone back in over top of his own cross hatching and, you know, done some of this
and knocked it back.
Yeah, which is so cool. And you get a lot of, I wonder here too, if that's a racing or reductive white. There's some weird of that textural stuff going on that you're talking about.
Right.
Maybe some of the pencils are just in there. But really, this is indicative of once he gets into the 70s, you know, you can look at her hair too and see he goes, like he used to render that solid black and then goes into this much more, I would call it like illustrative style. Now here, there's two pieces. These are just opposite of each other in the book, two different pages. And they're about the same size on the drawing. You know, those are the sizes of the pieces. And you can see, again, I think these are just coming from, they must have just had different sources.
Right.
Because to me, like the dress, like it looks like a different dress. So
Yep.
I imagine there's just lost detail in here. But I thought that was a really interesting comparison to make between these two images. So just getting really close. And no critique of Fantagraphics at all. These are beautifully printed books. Glossy paper.
When you're talking about 50 years back, you know, what are the odds that the artist's family has retained all of their originals and that they can all be, you know, supplied with scans and things like that? I mean, it's a tough to assemble materials for a project that's that old.
Yeah, I don't know. It looks like he just drew clumsier on that one, though. It's interesting. It was something I scanned because they look so dramatically different. But now that I'm looking at unless there's just a lot of detail missing in here.
Yeah. Maybe just a different tool or in a hurry.
Yeah. It just looks like there should be a lot more of this kind of stuff in there. But yeah, they're beautiful reproductions. They're on glossy paper, which I think for this, like, I'll steal a line from Strange Death of Alex Raymond, high fashion plate stuff. Right. Works really good. It has this really sexy, sleek, modern look to it. So I think that was smart. I think normally, you know, we've talked about it. I have the preference for that, the non-coated paper, but the coated paper works really good in here. Nice, really rich black. So really beautiful production. Beautiful art, fascinating guy. And I think what we're going to do now is, instead of doing a recreation of his art, even though I would love to do that as well, Sean and I have talked about the fact that a lot of this stuff can seem, especially when we're basically tracing over someone else's art, it can feel very surface level analysis of the art. So I think this time we're going to go make a second video where we just try and use some of the composition tricks, these ideas of rhythm or the zooms of abstraction, and maybe me and Sean will put together a fake Crepax page. We're going to try out the whiteboard function in Zoom. So check that out. It will be up in a few days. Thanks for joining us. Take it away, Jack.
You want to see all these books? Smash that subscribe
show Jack this video, Carson.
No, Jesus. No. Actually, the video's all right. I think it was Berserk. I was sitting there making notes in Berserk. Maybe in this one, and he see me in here, like, obsessively making notes in these books, and he's like, "What are those?" Not for you, kid.